Moment for my conversation with Gary Brecker, where he lays out how you can become a superhuman, strip the fat off your body, and get yourself healthy with free, easy, simple exercises that will cost you nothing at all. When I heard the story about Dana White, and I saw he had gone from respectfully being a man that had a little bit of weight to having these six-pack abs on Instagram. Of course, the six-pack isn't the outcome. It's, as you've said, it's the stuff going on inside him. Right. That's really the transformation. But what can someone who's just heard that at home, where do they start with extending their life by triple and getting the...
So, he also started something called the Superhuman Protocol. And Superhuman Protocol is using magnetism, oxygen, and light, right? So the only things that we really get from Mother Nature, the big benefit we get from Mother Nature is we get magnetism from the earth, we get oxygen from the air, we get light from the sun. The truth is, most of us are not contacting the surface of the earth that much anymore. So he bought $150,000 worth of equipment, a PMF mat, an oxygen, what's called a hypermax oxygen to do exercise with oxygen therapy, and a red light therapy bed. And I had him use that equipment every single day, 7 days a week. But if your listeners want to do it for free, you can take off your shoes and contact the surface of the earth. And I'm talking about bare feet on soil, dirt, grass, sand. Because earthing and grounding is a very real thing. We actually discharge into the earth. Human beings build up a charge. Do you know that pH, the acid alkaline scale, pH stands for potential hydrogen. It's a charge. It's a complete fallacy that you can get alkaline by drinking alkaline water. That's the biggest marketing myth ever sold to the public. But you can get alkaline by contacting the surface of the earth. So if you don't have 150 grand, which I don't expect anybody listening to this podcast to spend 150 grand, but he did. I said, you need a PMF mat so that you can be alkaline. You need to spend 10 minutes a day breathing 95% O2 under mild exercise, and you need to lay in a red light therapy bed. So in the absence of the Superhuman Protocol, you can become superhuman by contacting the earth and by learning to do breath work.
Let's talk about breath work.
I spend 8 minutes every day doing a very specific series of breath work. People do not realize the power of something that is so accessible, so free, and so easy to do, right? They want things to be more complicated, but it's not. And when I said the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease, it's absolutely true. Remember that every elevated emotional state that a human being can experience actually has in its molecular structure, oxygen is a component of that emotion. So if you look at the difference between passion, elation, joy, arousal, libido, and anger, for example, it's usually only one neurotransmitter and the presence of oxygen. The reason why no human being has ever woken up laughing is because you don't have the oxidative state to experience laughter right out of deep sleep. But can you wake up angry? Yes, because anger doesn't require oxygen. So every morning, contact the surface of the earth and then spend 8 minutes I do a Wim Hof style breath work. I give credit where credit's due. He's the father of breath work as far as I'm concerned. So I do 3 rounds of 30 deep breaths, like obnoxiously deep breaths. And I start by trying to take my belly button and pull my belly button out towards the wall. Imagine there's a string pulling your belly button towards the wall, and then you fill from the lobes of the lung to the apex of the lung, and then you exhale and just relax. God knows what they think we're doing out there. Right outside this podcast, they're like a bunch of freak. I knew it was a cult. I knew he was a cult leader. But so you do 3 rounds of 30 breaths. On the 30th breath, you exhale and you hold. Allow the carbohydrate receptor to reset. When you don't feel you can hold anymore, you take a deep breath in. You hold again, and then you let it out slow. And you start again. I would suggest that you start with 3 rounds of 5 breaths. Then work to 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. If you get lightheaded, this is a good sign that the oxygen tension is changing in your brain. If your fingers and toes get tingly, this is a good sign that you're changing the oxygen tension. If you feel some kind of heat, temperature change in your neck, these are all great signs. You will get to the point where you can actually hold your breath for 2 or 3 minutes, sometimes 4 minutes between rounds of breath work. And then the last thing is to expose yourself to natural sunlight. First thing in the morning, First 45 minutes of the day, God gives us a very, very special type of light. It's called first light. There's no UVA, there's no UVB rays in this light, so that it's not the damaging rays from the sun. It still generates vitamin D3. It has a positive effect on cortisol, on vitamin D3. First light is the best way to reset your circadian rhythm. So by contacting the surface of the earth, doing breath work, and getting first light, you can get to the same place that Dana White did with 150 grand in equipment.
What about oxygen masks? Because I'll be honest, when I read about the Dana story, I went on Amazon soon after, and I was like, I'm just going to buy an oxygen canister. Good idea, bad idea?
So what you want to do is, you get an oxygen concentrator, which takes 21% oxygen which is what the concentration at sea level. It turns it into 95% O2, and it fills this bag, and it can refill this bag over and over and over again. Okay, I use one called the Hypermax. You can see it on my Instagram, and you plug it in, you turn it on, it fills this bag, and then you go in, you put an oxygen mask on, and you exercise for 10 minutes, only 10 minutes. Cycle for 3 minutes, sprint for 30 seconds, cycle for 3 minutes, sprint for 30 seconds, cycle 3 minutes, sprint 30 seconds, and you're done. And what this does is it raises something called the partial pressure, the storage of oxygen in your blood. The only two-time Nobel laureate prize winner in medicine, Dr. Otto Warburg, won both of his Nobel Prizes for his work in exercise with oxygen therapy. You want to be a superhuman. Do mild exercise every day while breathing 95% O2. It's important that you're exercising. And then after that, you move into a red light therapy bed, photobiomodulation. So, if you don't have access to a Hypermax oxygen machine, just do the breath work, get the breath in, exchange the oxygen tension in the tissues and expose yourself to first light.
What about cold water plunging?
So I'm a huge fan of cold water plunging, but probably not for the reasons why you think. I also sit on the board of the NFL Alumni Association Athletica as a health services director. There was a time when we used to think that putting athletes in cold water after exercise was good because of its anti-inflammatory effects. We know now that that's only about 15% of the benefit. The majority of the benefit comes from something called a cold shock protein. If you really want to be fascinated, Google cold shock proteins. These are reserve proteins that are in your liver. They're dumped into the bloodstream in an effort to save your life when you put yourself in cold water. They scour the body of free radical oxidation. They increase the rate of protein synthesis, muscle repair. They are free. You get them when you put yourself in cold water. I don't know what the Celsius conversion is, but I use 50 degrees for 3 minutes. Minimum, 6 minutes maximum.
Cold.
Yes. It's actually not that cold. I mean, I see people getting in 37, 38 degree water. There's no evidence that I've read that shows that colder is better. You get a peripheral vasoconstriction, so it forces all the oxygen into the core and up to the brain. And you get an activation of something called brown fat, right? Thermogenesis comes from brown fat. And for the women that are listening, for some reason I seem to ensnare the women when I say this. Remember that the definition of a calorie is a measure of heat, right? I mean, the definition of a calorie is the amount of energy it takes to raise 1 cubic centimeter of water 1 degree centigrade. So if a calorie is a measure of heat, then this means that when heat's leaving your body, calories are leaving your body. So if there is nothing, no amount of exercise hits cardio, no type of cardiovascular or weight training that comes anywhere close to immersing yourself in cold water in terms of what will strip fat off your body fast. If you want to strip fat off your body, get in cold water 3 to 6 minutes a day.
That's fascinating. Because the oxygen rushes to my head, that's why it has a really profound impact on mood.
That's why it has a very profound impact on mood, because if you think about it, what's the reason why we need deep sleep? What happens in deep sleep that's so special? There's a secondary oxygen transfer. We transfer oxygen from the periphery, from the extremities, to the brain. Remember, the brain's a non-metabolic organ. So in other words, it's unlike a muscle. If I pick up a weight and start to work out my muscle, my arm, my body will send more blood, more amino acids, more oxygen to that muscle because it's working. Well, if I'm sitting at my computer and I'm watching the reruns of The Simpsons, or I'm sitting in my computer and I'm solving the most complex joint venture agreement, partnership agreement with all kinds of mathematical equations, my brain gets the same amount of nutrients. Same amount of blood flow, same amount of oxygen. So it eats the same meal, whether or not it's in a dead sprint or whether or not it's just chilling on the couch, except in deep sleep and when you're in cold water, because it's forcing the oxygen up to the brain.
The second most replayed moment is a moment from my conversation with Dr. Tim Spector, a favorite on the Diary of a CEO. And here he talks about health more holistically and some of the biggest myths that most of us believe that are currently standing in our way. we've got a fitness group amongst some of my friends. There's about 10 of us in it. And we've been tracking how often we work out and how frequently we work out and the workouts that we do. And one of the things I have to say is pretty much no one in the group has lost any weight. We've been doing this for a year. And that kind of bucks what you would think. So the only time that I lost weight was actually when I went on the keto diet. I went from 14 stone 8 to 13 stone 8 in roughly in several weeks. But exercise and exercising for almost religiously for the last 2.5 years doesn't really seem to impact my weight at all in the way that the fitness experts might tell me on Instagram. What's your stance on the role that exercise plays in weight loss?
There's very little role in weight loss. All the studies, long-term studies, show it doesn't help weight loss, and it's been grossly exaggerated as an easy fix for our obesity problem.
Exercise doesn't help weight loss?
No. All the studies show that. The only caveat to that is if you have changed your diet, improved your diet, and you've lost some weight, maintaining some exercise does help prevent it going back up again. But as on its own, if you don't change your diet, it's of no use. And that's well known now by all the obesity experts and all the studies.
Does sugar make us fat? Is that the culprit? Is that one of the main things that's contributing to?
No, again, that's reductionism.
Okay.
But the reason exercise doesn't work, it's important to realize this, is because we all know this, that you go for a walk, build up hunger before a meal. That's what your parents told you, and everything about exercise is after it your body slows down, your metabolism slows down, and it tries to regain the energy that you've lost. That's just our evolution. And so that's why it's great for your health. I exercise, fantastic for your mood, it's great for your heart, anti-cancer, all kinds of things. We should all do it, but absolutely not if your goal is weight loss. You have to do something about changing your diet. And I think that's the big, a huge myth, particularly perpetuated by gyms and fitness apps and everything else. And it is complete nonsense.
I read that you, when you looked at studies over 30 years and you looked at how many studies had been done on the relationship of exercise and weight versus things like sugar and weight, there was 12 times more studies done on the relationship of exercise and weight versus sugar and weight. And why is that? Why is there less research done on the latter?
I think that's the influence of governments and the food companies and the drink companies. So a lot of the exercise research done in the last 20 years was sponsored by large corporations who wanted to make this link between exercise and weight loss so that they could continue to sell sugary, ultra-processed foods and drinks and just say it's childhood obesity is because we don't have playgrounds and we don't encourage this, and that's why the Cokes and the Pepsis are always there at the sponsoring Olympic events and associating themselves with sport. And they gave hundreds of millions to various physiology departments, sports departments, nutrition departments to do research in this area. Basically, it was really hard to get anyone to do research into how sugary drinks make you gain weight or cause problems, because the amount of money for nutrition has been abysmally poor, from governments, and that's why only the first ever study of ultra-processed food in a controlled trial was only about 3 years ago, and it's been around for 30, 40 years. So such is the power of that lobby that it doesn't necessarily distort the research in a sort of evil way, but they point it to make sure that the researchers are working in an area that they want people to work in, and distracting them, keeping them away from talking about sugars or even artificial sweeteners, which in my view are nearly as bad because they're sort of hidden, and deflecting us from the idea that yes, giving kids sugary drinks or even artificial sweet drinks is going to be bad for them and cause obesity.
Wait, so I cut out sugary drinks about a year ago. I still have the same brands, but I have the no sugar version.
Oh dear.
Oh shit, what do you mean, oh dear?
All the summary of the trials shows that if you take young adults and kids, and they will say on 2 cans of full sugar sodas, and you change them to the diet version, there's no real difference in weight or metabolic changes in their blood. You will go to the dentist less, so you don't get as many fillings, but and yet you should be gaining 300 calories, right, if you were doing 2 cans a day. So it doesn't work out as it should do, and that's because of these chemicals are not inert. So the sweeteners in kids, they change their brains to give them they want more sweetness in their food. Okay, so it could reflect your wish for your late night milk chocolate, who knows, and it makes it very difficult to train kids to have more bitter foods or sour foods if they've got these artificial sweeteners in their diet all the time. But they've now shown that all these sweeteners actually affect your gut microbes. So even stevia, these sort of so-called healthy ones, have an effect on your gut microbes, and they're not inert. So we know that saccharin and sucralose also cause spikes in your blood sugar. When I did it, I have a trace. They're not supposed to, but they actually do things they're not supposed to. So we know very little about these products, and my view is that they are harmful, probably not as bad as having sugar, but they are absolutely not a health drink, and we should be encouraging people to have teas and kombuchas and more bitter tasting, interesting flavors and foods than just this ultra sweet chemical concoctions.
It's this sugar conglomerate that have been funding much of the research that points towards some of the things you're talking about there. That's also the conglomerate that wants us to believe the calories in, calories out approach, because if I just view all foods as kind of equal and on this sort of calorie number, then I can drink some of the sugary fizzy drinks and some of the processed foods. As long as I keep it within that sort of calorie deficit, I'll be fine. And so is that sugar conglomerate, is the processed food conglomerate for the calorie model?
Absolutely.
They need that, right?
Absolutely, it's vital, 0 calories or 1 calorie, on the can, that's what you see. And, you're fooling people into thinking this is a healthy drink, and if I used to have full Coke or Pepsi and now I'm having the diet version, I'm getting 300 calories less a day, I should lose weight. It's exactly what they've been doing, and they're also desperate to show that artificial sweeteners are really healthy, and they come down on anyone who tries to say that they're, could be in any way dangerous, and yet they're not obliged to test them. So none of the chemicals added really go through rigorous testing on how they affect our gut microbes, and this is their testing mechanisms haven't changed in 50 years.
As you'll know if you've listened to this podcast before, I'm an investor in a company called Huel. I'm on their board and they sponsor this podcast, and I have a very exciting announcement to make. This product called Daily Greens is one of the most highly requested products at Huel, but it's never been sold in the UK before. Until now. It's often difficult to get all of the greens into our diet that we need to have a healthy gut microbiome and a healthy body. And with Huel's Daily Greens product, with 1 scoop every morning, a very, very delicious scoop, you can get 91 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced nutrients into your diet. The most important point here is I genuinely believe it tastes delicious. It's maybe my favorite Huel product ever, for all the reasons I've described. So if you want access to this product, you can sign up right now. The link is in the description below. It launches in the UK in January. Because of the demand, I'm pretty sure it's going to sell out. And here is the single most replayed moment as it relates to health on the Diary of a CEO of 2023.
So the first thing I came up against, because this was around the time of the financial crisis, was the lack of understanding of the brain-body connection. So these high-performing executives were kind of acting like their body was just the vehicle that was moving their brain around from meeting to meeting. And both disrespecting their physical health, but also not understanding that what they were actually really being paid for was to use their brain, and they weren't creating the best conditions for that brain to operate in. And I'm talking about really basic things like sleep and a good diet and hydration and not being sedentary, managing your stress, etc. So, this tiny organ, if it's not in an environment that is giving it the best chance of doing its job, it's not going to, and a crack's going to appear somewhere. And the first time I really kind of had a big confrontation with the bank was when people were dropping dead on the trading floor of heart attacks. And they asked me to work more in my capacity as a former medical doctor to help with physical stuff. And I said, I can't do that if we don't address the mental and emotional piece, because that's what's causing this. And they just could not get that.
What did you want to do with those people in a specific and practical sense? If you could have, been in charge of preventing them from dropping dead on the trading floor, where would you have started?
The understanding that stress, so everything that you're experiencing mentally and emotionally that's challenging, and things like a lot of travel, which is challenging for your body, that raises levels of the hormone cortisol, which comes from your adrenal glands. And that cortisol courses around your blood through your entire body and brain. And the brain has receptors for understanding what's going on in terms of threat to your survival. So in a 24-hour cycle, depending on your age and your gender, there's a normal range for cortisol. So it can go up and down like this. If something challenging happens, we need to adapt and rise to meet that challenge. But when that level is above the top range all the time, these receptors in your brain basically think that there's an imminent threat to your survival. So there's this whole cascade of hormones, and cortisol causes inflammation in the body. So inflammation of your vascular system, inflammation around your heart, and everything else, gut and other things. But particularly around that time, we were seeing a lot of heart attacks caused by stress. This was in the absence of high blood pressure, high cholesterol, smoking. It was all stress.
Once upon a time, I Googled, because I had a thesis, I Googled, is stress contagious? And it came up and it said it was contagious. Is it contagious? In what circumstances do we need to be aware of that contagion? And more importantly, how and why is it contagious?
Okay, I will tell you the answer to that, but I'm going to ask you a question first. Have you ever walked into a room with someone and by the time you've left that meeting with them, you just feel so drained? Okay, so so you know the feeling. So I'll tell you how it works physiologically. I'm going to start with something else to build you up to this story. So, did you know that women who live together or work closely together will synchronize their menstrual periods within 2 or 3 months? So, whenever I want to explain something that's complex, or I don't actually know the current neuroscience, I always take it back to what happened in ancient times. So when we were living in the cave, the men hunted and gathered and lived quite nomadically. So sometimes they would go away for months at a time. And in those days, the most fundamental important thing for the survival of the human species was that the alpha male must pass on his genes. So if he was going to be away for months and he couldn't, there weren't men there to defend the women from predators, maybe there was going to be a spell of the ice age and they would all freeze to death, or they wouldn't have food, he needed to make sure that at least 5 women were impregnated with his sperm at the same time. So that if there was a food shortage or there was stillbirth or miscarriage or whatever, at least 1 out of 5 would survive. So to be able to do that, they had to be fertile at the same time. So that's why that mechanism exists. Now, we don't need that mechanism now, but it's still wired into the way that we operate. So those sex steroid hormones like estrogen and progesterone, they leak out of our sweat about this far around us. And that's why if you're living with another woman, or if you're sitting across the desk every day, then particles of hormone from my sweat would go into through the skin of the other woman.
If she's within what distance?
I mean, it's not You wouldn't have to be sitting next to each other. If you lived together, then that means you're interacting enough that it would happen.
Okay.
So particles.
But not if you work together.
If you work together and you sit right next to each other every day, then it does happen too. So, you know, in a small office that's got like 6 girls in it, that the menstrual synchronization will happen. Interestingly, it's led by the alpha female. So, yeah. So you can work out, if you don't know already, who the alpha female is. Well, if you know, basically, let's say my cycles don't change and everyone says, oh, I got my period early, or I haven't had my period yet, but now it's started, then that would mean that probably I was the alpha female.
How does the body know who the alpha female is?
That will be to do with levels of testosterone.
Why does that matter who the alpha female is? Why does it matter that they sync up with her?
I don't know if it really matters. I think it's just a case of physiology. So it's a little bit like in the troops of gorillas, the stress levels of the silverback gorilla affect the other gorillas more than gorillas who are peers to each other. So we have a natural hierarchy, and it must be related to survival as well.
So she was probably the person who the alpha male was going to impregnate first.
Probably.
So everyone needs to kind of fall in line, because when she starts having sex, they need to be ready.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also it'll probably be to do with things like, you know, survival genes. So it'll be the people with the hardiest genes, because that's what we want to pass on as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, makes sense. Most resilient. Okay,
so where were we?
Stress and contagion. We've done all the hormones and the menstrual cycle.
So basically cortisol is a hormone that works in that same way. So cortisol is the main stress hormone. And this one doesn't matter if you're male or female, but it does matter where you are in the hierarchy of the organisation, as I just mentioned. So usually in that conversation that I mentioned to you, where you go into a room and you just feel completely drained afterwards, usually the person that comes out feeling drained is less senior than the person that's had that effect on them. And that's why this is so crucial to leadership, because your stress levels as a leader, as a CEO, are going to have more impact on everybody else than the rest of the people put together, basically. So managing your stress is obviously important for you, but it's important in terms of what happens to other people. And the first issue I came up against was CEOs and CFOs that said, well, I won't show them that I'm stressed. I won't tell them what's happening with the numbers. I won't display emotions in front of them. And I said, they're still going to know. Physiologically, it's going to impact them. So now you really have to do something about it. And the other thing about cortisol, which is quite funny, well, one of the side effects is quite funny, is that as a survival mechanism, it will help you to store fat around your abdomen. So, you know, again, in the cave, if you were potentially going to not find food for a month, then if you had extra fat around your abdomen, you could digest that and survive till you could find food. So with my clients in financial services, it got to a point where as soon as I walked into the room, they just lift their t-shirt up and say, now you know how I've been in the last month.
So stress causes belly fat?
Belly fat that's really hard to shift. So again, what I would see with people is that they would say, oh, I've put on a bit of weight around the middle, had to loosen the belt a bit. So I've started eating less, I've started exercising more, and I still can't shift it. And again, that's when I would explain this is the impact of cortisol. As long as you're still leaking out extra cortisol, nothing's going to change. So, and like I said, even exercising more or eating better, less or differently, whatever it is, wouldn't shift that fat. You had to get to the root cause. You had to reduce the cortisol.